This is Fire Emblem Builder GBA. It is a computer program you can use to look into the programming of Fire Emblem games for the Game Boy Advance, and you can also create your own using this program if you know what you're doing. And I'm going to show you some tips on what a lot of the features in the program do. This here is the welcome dialog. It's what is opened up when you first open up the program. You can find this program by searching for it online. You have an option to open up the most recent ROM you've used. A ROM is a file that contains like a video game. You have to download that from the internet and use it to play a video game. So you can view into the files of it here. You can also open another one from somewhere else in your folders. You can also update it to the latest version from here. So you can click that up there to open it up. And this is the simple menu. This is what always opens up when you turn on the program, and closing out this simple menu is what closes out the program. So one thing you're going to want to do before using this program is getting an emulator, and I recommend Visual Boy Advance. You can use emulators to play the ROM file games that you download, and one of the features of this program is that you can set up an emulator attached to the program. So if you press F5 anywhere in the program, it will load up an emulator of the game, which I can drag up right here. So at any time you can load up the game from within here. I'm going to be using Sacred Stones for all this demonstration because it has the most features in comparison to the other Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games. Now, another button you're going to want to know about here is the Advanced Editors button. This brings up a big screen with a lot of available editors for you to use. While the Advanced Editor screen may seem a bit complicated when you see it for the first time, it would be good to know that many of the editors you can see here are not actually things you would want to mess with commonly. A lot of these can just be ignored and forgotten about until some very specific circumstances. So with the Advanced Editor menu, there's a search bar up here which you can use to narrow down what you're looking for, like this for example. And it has the same tools and settings as the simple menu. Another thing that might be useful I'd like to mention is the simple image menu. Later when we're getting into these editors, you can use this simple image menu to access a lot of them from one place. So this right here is a program that automatically detects errors inside of what you're doing. So it will do a scan of the files and try to look for anything that's wrong. And if there's an error it detects, that will pop up right here on the simple menu. And you can also check for errors yourself by loading up that lint menu there. The last thing for this basic section is showing you how to save your work. So for example, in this editor here, if I wanted to change Erica's starting level to 2, then if I click away here to this, or if I close out of the editor entirely, then it does not actually save what I just did there. Now it's back to 1. What you need to do if you want to save your changes is click the yellow button in the corner, Write to ROM, and then when you load up your emulator, it will have those changes saved, and if you close this out and open it back up, then those changes will still be there. And when you're done using the program and close it out, then you have to come to the simple menu or the advanced menu and click File, Save. Otherwise, it's not going to save what you've done. So it's very important to remember you have to go through 2 different ways of saving before all of your work is definitively safe. What makes the emulator function so useful for this, being able to open an emulator with F5, is that you can test out any changes you've made without having to save it to the actual file, because once you've saved your work to the ROM, it is definitely kept that way. You can't go back to the way it was before, and if a glitch occurs, which happens very commonly if you make a mistake, then you have to restart from the beginning or find some way to undo it. So you use the F5 emulator feature to test out your work, and if something's gone wrong, you can close out the program, open it again, and you'll be back to where you started, which is why you should save very often to make sure that you can always go back to an older version if you need to. The first thing I'm going to go over here is how to make your own maps in this program. You can access the map editor either from the simple menu here or from the advanced editors menu. Click that to open it and drag this up here. Now you can see the prologue map of Sacred Stones. You're able to come over here on the left and choose any type of tile that is available for this tile set. You can copy multiple tiles at once if you'd like, if you want to grab a whole castle like this. Then you can click in here and make one show up. That's one way to edit the maps here. You can also change the tile set, so there's alternate color schemes for a lot of the ones here, and if we go to a different map like this one, we can see like a castle tile set. There's also multiple different castle colors. So once you decide what type of map you're going to make, you can choose from this list here and use the tile sets to portray the setting you'd like to use. You can also come up here and resize it. You can add more to the top of the map. You can take away from the bottom or the right, left if you'd like, and it resizes the map just like that. It'll make these into empty tiles that you can then fill up with something else. There's a program I like to use to make my maps, and it's named Fire Emblem Map Creator. I have that right here. You can also find this online. What you can do with this is, when you load up the program, you have to open up a tile set, such as Fire Emblem 6 Castle, sure. And you can create a new map with a set width and height. Like that, it'll be blank at first. And you can widen this here to see all of the options. Just like in the map editor built into the program, you can draw on this too with types of tiles. But this also has a rectangle maker and a paint bucket tool, which can be helpful in some situations. You can still resize the map from this menu, add onto the top of it if you'd like, just like that. Another very useful feature that this program has are the generate and repair features. You can generate a map with this button up here, or you can do Control-N, and it will generate a map. Castle might not be the best example here, because it's not the best at making castles, but let's say Fire Emblem 8 fields. It can make different fields and fill in almost all the tiles in there, and then you can press the repair button or Control-R to fix those slots, and then you'll have a map here that you can make minor changes to and then use as your own. It generates random maps, which can be helpful if you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. You can go through a lot of different examples with this program. You're also able to download the map you've created here. You can save map as, and once you've done that, you can come back into FEBuilder and click the import button to import that map you've just made. So if you're struggling with coming up with good map ideas, I would recommend looking through some random ones with this map creator. Now I'm going to close this out without saving, and I'll close this out too. I don't want to save the changes I made to that map there. Close anyway. And I'm also going to show off the chapter editor, which has a lot of features that are useful when you're about to make a map. So we can look through, there's a lot of different options here, but not all of these will be used. A lot of these are features that are adjusted on their own, and a lot of these are features that you're not going to use if you're using a Sacred Stones game. There are some options here that have X's next to their names, and if you hover over them it will tell you that those are not used in this game, and you don't need to mess with those. So like enable battle preparations, that's done from a different area, so you don't need to mess with those settings. Right here you can find the fog level, so if you set it to 0 there's no fog, and you can change to different visibility amounts there with that. You can also change the weather to snowy, blizzard, rain. There is also a battle backgrounds menu. Some chapters use custom backgrounds, and you can set one of those from here, and it will make every battle, if you have battle backgrounds turned on, use those backgrounds. You can also change the difficulty from here. I believe this gives stat boosts to enemies on the map, depending on your difficulty. So you can see different maps have different boosts there. There's also the ability to change music from this menu, so you can change player phase, enemy phase, and NPC phase music. You can see unused features from this menu, like how they use the enemy phase BGM here for the NPC phase on the first map because there aren't any NPCs here. But on a map that does have NPCs, they have the correct music used, a different type of music. There's also wall HP down here if you want to change how much health destructible walls on the map have. And over on this side of it, you can change the chapter number that shows up in the top corner of the preparation screen. You can change when the victory theme starts playing. Normally it's when there's one enemy left on the battlefield, but you can change that to 2 or I know Binding Blade uses 3. You can change that if you'd like there. There's another feature here which is used for a later part with starting up the map, and you can have it start as a black screen or start as the map. You can use that for something. And you can edit the clear condition. You can see here it says the clear condition for this map is to defeat the boss, but you can come in later and change this text to defeat the name of a different boss. Other text strings in this area are the other clear conditions, so you can scroll through these and find the one you want, or you can make one in a different part of the text. I'll show you how to make your own text later. You can also change the mini objective display, so you set all those to the objective you want to have for your chapter. And you can also turn on defense chapters here. You can set a number of turns to defend the map before it ends itself, and you can set a unit to defend. And that's all for the map creation part. Next up is customizing your own units, your own characters. You can do that by coming here to the character editor. You can change most of the properties of each character from this screen. For example, you have their name and description up here. You can see they're all stored in the same area. There's also a button here that says hard coding. Clicking on this will show you that Erica is programmed to be the main character of her part of the story and is the supply unit for her part of the story. On someone like Seth, you won't see a hard coding button because there is nothing there to show. The support class button up here, this doesn't actually have a purpose. You can change this to whatever you want, but it's not actually going to affect gameplay in any way. Instead, it is used for the stat calculator down here. Based on the class up here, it will take the growth rates and base stats and the class base stats of this class here, and it will combine them to calculate the average stats at different levels. This is not perfect. It doesn't include the promotion bonuses, but otherwise it can give you a good idea of what the character you make is going to look like at certain levels. Change this back to a 1. You can change their, like I just showed, you can change their stats here, like their level, their base, HP, strength, skill, You can see that all of Erica's are 0. That's because if we look at her class, then it already has all of her base stats inputted there, so it adds them to the zeros here to figure out the stats she's going to start with. So if you're making a new character, you need to take that into account, and don't just put in their exact stats here. You need to subtract the base stats of their class to get the correct numbers. And it can also go negative if we find a good example of that. Some characters have stats lower than their class bases. I don't see any examples here, but it is something that's allowed. You can change it down to a negative number as long as the stat itself doesn't go negative. That doesn't work properly. You can use the calculator to see if everything worked properly, and you can also change the weapon levels down here for different weapon types. You can, for example, I believe 251 is S rank, 181 is A rank, 121 is B rank, and so on. You can memorize those if you'd like. It could be helpful if you do this, if you work on this for a long time, it can save some time. You can also see a bunch of abilities down here. The only ones that seem to be used for, like, characters are the female checkbox, the triangle attack checkbox. They only use the first one. The second one is just used in Fire Emblem 6. And the boss flag is used for boss characters, such as this one. There's some other things on the side here. You can see a sort order button. This is the order that the units will be displayed when you click on the unit button in the menus of the game. So you can see the way that characters will be sorted in there. The lords will be first. They're both set to have 1s. There's also the affinity button used for supports. There's the support data, which we'll get to later. And there's the conversation group, which is an unused feature from Fire Emblem 7. And that is all we're going to look at here. There's some more features around here, but those are related to other editors. Next up, I'm going to talk about configuring supports. By clicking this support data button, it will link you to this menu here called the support thresholds menu. You can also access this from the advanced editors right here. This allows you to edit which characters each character can talk to and what their initial value is for growth and base friendship levels. This button here, it sets itself automatically, so you don't need to mess with that if you're changing the amount here. You can also remove one of the supports by setting it all to 0. There's also a checkbox here to automatically adjust the other character's values. If I set that to a B, we can come down to this and see that it is now a B instead of an A for value. You might be confused about the use of letters here. That is because a lot of the things in this program use hexadecimal, which counts from 1 to 9 normally, but after 9 comes A, B, C, D, E, F, then 10, 11, 12, all the way up to 18 and 19, then 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, 1F, and 20 comes after that. So you can either memorize how that works, or if you're just starting out, there are online converters that will convert normal numbers like these into hexadecimals until you get used to using that here. There's also a conversation editor you can access by clicking on one of those buttons there, and you can see the conversations characters can have. You can scroll through the list. You'll notice that there's a lot of them down here, but when you get towards the bottom, there's a lot less per character. That's because you only need to set it once. So even though Ephraim can talk to Ford, if you come down to come down to see there aren't even any ones that start with 4 there, because all of his support partners have him on this side. You only need to set it once for each pair. Alright, the next thing we're going to look at is the palette editor. If you open up the advanced editors, you can find that by searching for it here. I'm going to click on this one. So you can see here with Gilliam, for example, how he has base class and 2 promoted classes labeled up here, and their corresponding labeled down here. You can see it has different values for each that are related to which color appears on his character sprite. You can also go to other characters like Ross and see how he has a lot of different palettes here, because he's a trainee unit and he has extra classes like the second base class, extra promoted classes, and he has the warrior palette put in twice here because he can access that class from 2 different ways. And you can also see with a unit like Seth how he just has promoted class put in here and nothing else. And when you've got a character in here, you can click on that and see the actual palette data, and you can edit this in any way you'd like that. You can also, back on this screen, you can change it to different palettes in the same area, although if you go to the wrong kind, it's not going to show up correctly. So you need to be careful about which ones you're using for different characters. And here you can see the RGB values for each palette. And one thing you can do is you can use online programs to choose a color, it will give you the value, or you can do it by hand and edit the values until you find something that looks correct to you. You can also import palettes from other Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games. If there is a character palette you like in Fire Emblem 7, you can copy it over here and use it for a character in your own game. And you can copy values from other characters. I could take a picture of these values and write them in to this palette here. That's a lot of different ways to get colors around to use for different characters. You can also use this button here to display different battle animations using the palette that's active here, but it's still connected to its original source of Gilliam. Next, we're going to take a look at the portrait editor. You can come in here. One way to access that is from clicking on a character's portrait in the character editor. That'll bring it up, pull it up here, and you can see all of the portraits in the game. There are some other ones down here you can use for special events, like the generic soldier ones, generic civilians, along with, of course, all the playable characters and all of the enemy bosses. Some characters have special closed eyes portraits. I believe those are used for when a conversation starts with them having closed eyes. You can use that there. You can import and export palettes from other games, although I believe if you import if you import a portrait from Fire Emblem 6, they don't always look correct in this. You might have to play around with them a bit to make it work properly. You have X and Y buttons here for changing the position of the mouth and eyes on the bottom screen there. You want to make them match up with what it shows so that when they blink or move their mouth, it will display properly in the game. That's how you set it to be labeled as a closed eye portrait, that button there. And I have a program that I use to edit portraits. Making your own can be difficult, but there's a way to change these in your own way. The program I use for editing portraits is an online website called Piskel, shown right here. You don't need to make an account to use it, and it's free to use. You can export the portraits from inside Fire Emblem Builder, and you can import them into here. Import it as a single image. And now we can see this is what the portrait files look like inside of the game. It has their big primary portrait, closed eyes, and moving mouth, and the small portrait it shows in the corner of the screen when you select them on the map. But what this program has is paint all pixels of the same color. So what you can do is emulate the way hair color works in this game, and you can find a red color like that maybe, put it there. You can move it a little bit darker, and click there, and move it even darker, and click there. And if you change those extra blue pixels there, maybe even to colors you've already used if you feel like it that, then suddenly you have a new looking portrait. This one doesn't look very great. I didn't space out my color choosing that well, but if you play around with things, you can make it look a bit more realistic, and you can suddenly have a portrait that is the same as one in the real game, but it looks different and it's a different thing to see, rather than just seeing the same portraits named after different characters. I show this method because making your own portraits from scratch is more difficult than it might seem. So if you are an inexperienced game designer, Fire Emblem ROM hacker, and you want to have your own custom portraits, you can use this method on this site or any other site to change things. I can also show, like, changing the armor color. Blue armor now. And you can come over here to the side and you can click download as a sprite sheet, and it'll download it just like this, the way it shows it on the screen, and you can import it straight back into the program. One thing to keep in mind is that it can only handle 16 colors on a palette, so if you try to use more than that, then when you try to upload it back into Fire Emblem Builder, it will tell you it has too many colors on the palette, and it will remove some of them itself to make it work. So make sure to stay within the 16 color range you can see here, and you'll be good to go with making your own different looking portraits. Just to show you, after you've downloaded it from the site, it'll show up in your downloads folder, and you can import it here into the program and it will display properly here. I can bring up the emulator and show you that if I start up a new game and skip through all of the opening text, you can see it does show up there properly. So that's how you can add your own portraits. One thing that might occur is if you move this portrait over to a different character, then you might see some strange things with portraits being too high or too low in certain menus, which you can use the portrait height editor for. Some characters have them raised or lowered in certain circumstances. You may notice when you open this, it starts at number 10 on the character editor list and goes down from there. Stops before getting into the non-playable characters, just a very limited range. I'm not sure why this happens, but if you click the expanded list button, now it shows everybody. I'm not sure if there are any effects from doing this. I'm not sure if it causes any errors, but it doesn't seem to on the surface. So you can open it up that way, and you can see that it still says raise where it said that before for this character. So you can change this to raise or do not raise if you see any things happening with portraits too high or too low. Next up, if you're going to add a new character to the game, you're going to have to give them their own unique death quote. You can find the editor here for that. And you can see it shows a bunch of bosses first, and then below them is all the playable characters. You can see the bosses have them assigned to only happen in certain chapters. That isn't really necessary for bosses unless they're going to show up in multiple, like Valter, for example. He has multiple different death quotes for when you fight him, or something like Orson. They look the same there, but it has different chapter IDs because the final chapters here, these are the Erica route final chapters, and these are the Ephraim route ones. They have, even though they look the same on the surface, they have different internal IDs, so you'll see separate battle quotes for those characters because they actually appear on multiple different maps inside the game's code. Lion too. And I believe for his final chapter variant, he does have 2 different death quotes depending on which route you took, so that can be useful in having that feature. For all the playable characters, you can see they have FF here for any, and also FF for unconditional. With hexadecimal and this program, it uses that value, like FF or FFFF, very commonly to be like the farthest down value. Like a lot of times it's used for any or none or things along those lines. There are also, for characters that have special death quotes on certain chapters, such as Natasha here or Kyle here on his chapter, you can have those up here. I believe they have to be above their normal death quote on the table. I think what happens is if you put Kyle's normal death quote higher, it would see that first and play it anyway, instead of choosing the special chapter 5 death quote. So you should have all of the special ones raised up here above the others. There's also the ability to set flags to happen, which I'll explain more about flags later, but you can set it to tell the game that the boss has been defeated. You can set it to tell that. You can also set it to give a game over with someone like Mansell, wherever he is. Here we go. If he gets a game over, if he gets killed, he gives a game over. So you can set that here too, telling the game to make that happen. This condition menu does not actually seem to be used for anything. If you scroll through all the characters, you won't see any of them who use anything but unconditional. So you might just leave it as that when you're making your own custom death quotes for characters. I'll just quickly go through a couple of other things that might come in handy at some point. You can find this one here, the Summon Ability Editor, where if you have a character who is able to become a summoner class, you can tell the game which unit to summon. All 3 of the possible phantoms from Lion, Ewan, and Nal all have their own separate character entries in the character editor, where you can change their base stats and their weapon level. So if you add your own summoner, or yes, if you do that, then you can change which phantom class it summons, which character slot in the table it calls for. There's also the Summons Demon King editor. If you use the Demon King as your final boss of your game, you can change which enemies he summons to be fitting for your setting. That's a possibility using that. Or also if you program a different character also to use his ability, you can use that summon editor to change which enemies are summoned in. Another thing is the Link Arena deny units. If you leave the Link Arena enabled in the game, which is a feature that lets you fight against other people online, I guess not online, it was with a link cable. You link your Game Boy to another Game Boy and you could fight against them in a little arena. You can still use that on an emulator, just in single player, but you can set it to deny certain units, such as you wouldn't want to have a Manakee come into the arena. So if you switch around the character slots and have this slot as a different type of character and you have a, like 1C, for example, as a mana gate, you could change this to deny that unit from entering the Link Arena, because generally those aren't allowed because they would be powerful. There's also the character endings editor. You can see up here they have, it lists a unit, and you can see there's a retreat designation here. You set this to a 2 if it's a unit that always shows up even if they are dead. Someone like Seth or Innes, even if they die in part of the game, they still show up in the story, which is why they have that retreat designation. They're characters who don't die if their character hits 0 HP. They can still show up in cutscenes. Down here you can edit the titles that it shows for each character, and you can edit the order that they're shown in the credits. This is actually the order that each character shows up when you're watching the game's credits, so you can change this to be whatever order that fits your game. And you can also specify group and solo endings for each character. You choose one of these 2 options depending on what it is, put in the 2 units, and you can have the text that displays with it shown there. So that is not everything yet, but a lot of how you make your own custom character. Now I'm going to explain how to make your own custom classes in this program. You're going to want to go to the class editor, which has information about all the classes in the game. If we click on Cavalier here, for example, you can see their name and details just like in the character menu. The menu class slider area here is used for auto-leveling enemy units. That's a thing the game can do when, if you have, let's just go for example here, if you look at all of these random character slots here for enemies, they all say level 1, but when the game spawns in these monsters they won't be at level 1. It uses the growth rates of the class to level them up to the proper level, and back to the class editor, this menu class area is used for assistance in that. If it's a promoted class, like the Paladin, then it can check the unpromoted version here and use the growth rates and base stats of that to help it with the auto-leveling. So you should just keep that as the alternate option, the unpromoted or the promoted version, depending on which type it already is. The generic enemy portrait, this is just what shows up when you click on an enemy that doesn't have their own custom portrait. They have their basic ones there. There's movement speed as well, which it says here you keep as 0 for every unit except armored units, where you set it to a 1 to make them move slowly. You've got their base stats and their max stats right here. You also have their growth rates, which isn't used for your characters at all, it's just used for the auto-leveling. And the base stats are what it adds to your character's base stats to make their base level stats. There's another stat calculator here as well, which works the same way. You can check how strong they'll be at each level. There's the promotion gains area, which you'll see are zeros here because you can't promote to a Cavalier, but for the Paladin, you can see the stat gains you will get when you promote to this class. There's also the class relative power button, which is used for experience gain calculations. Most classes just have it as a 3, but some special ones have it as a 2 because they get extra experience, I believe. It's also the base weapon levels. You can customize what it will spawn in an enemy with automatically unless you change it to something else in their character slot. And there's abilities here. The ones I didn't already talk about for the character editor are used here, so if you hover over these on your own time you can see what they do, and some of them Some of them are unknown, and some of them are unused, so you can just ignore those unless you have a purpose for them. Over here you can see these move costs. If you click on that, it'll take you to the terrain editor, which lets you see all of these different options. So you can change how much of your total movement it costs to cross each type of terrain. You'll see some things like villages have 255, which means that no unit can cross them except for like flying units. Even those can't cross those because those are the village entrance ones. And you'll have, if it has a 1 marked there, it just works like a normal space. You can move across 8 plain spaces with a cavalier because they have, with a paladin because they have 8 movement. This is how that works, but with a paladin, a fort space, you can only move across 4 of those with a paladin because it costs 2 movement instead of 1. So that's how that works. If you're adding a class of your own from a different game in the series or a custom class or something, you can edit how that works for them. Then there's also the map animations. These are the standing map animations. You can import and export these if you need to. And you can also click this button here to access the moving map animations. Again, you can import and export to get new ones in there. There's also the animation pointer button. This loads up the battle animations editor/viewer, and you can see every battle animation in the game. If you're assigning a class some battle animations, you'll see for the paladin, for example, they can use swords and lances, so they have options for both of those, and you'll put in the ID of the animation that it uses. And they also need an animation with an item setting, which is for when they have nothing in their hands. And if you go to a class that can use axes, such as the hero, then you'll see they have special item specifications for all 3 of the throwing axes, with unique animations for that. Compared to their axe animations, they have special ones for the throwing axes, but for magic swords, those are included in these ones, so you don't need to worry about them, just the throwing axes. If you're adding new animations, you can import animations from Blazing Blade and Binding Blade, but you might encounter some errors occasionally because they aren't built to work perfectly in Sacred Stones. So with Binding Blade animations especially, there might be problems with them working properly. Also, you can access, go to the advanced editors for this, you can access the promotion branches editor, where you can change what classes each class has the option to promote to. You can see that before promotion it's the Cavalier. Cavalier can promote to those, like you'd expect. There's also a movement sounds editor. If you load this up, you'll notice that it starts at slot 9, the knight, and doesn't include the things above it, like armor, like Cavaliers and the Lord classes. I'm not sure why this editor loads this way. If you click Extended List, then now it does have these walking sounds inputted, but if you look at them, you'll see that, for example, the Great Lords here and the Paladins are now set to have default walking sounds instead of the horse walking sounds, and if you go into the emulator and check, you can actually see it has set them to use those incorrect sounds now. So while I'm sure you could just set them back yourself using this menu, I'm not sure if there are any other long-term effects, so I would be wary about messing with any movement sounds, because this editor does not seem to work properly. That should be most of what you need to know to import your own class. I'm not going to show how to make your own battle animations, because that is a very complex process you need to find a dedicated guide for. Now we're going to talk about making your own custom items, which you can see from the item editor. You can look at the full list of items in the game, weapons and other items such as promotion items. You can see, again, the name and description. One thing you'll notice is that in the description box, you'll see that there's a space there, and if you go to all of these different weapons with blank descriptions, they have a space there. If you make a new weapon and give it a blank description, then it does not display the stats of the weapon properly, so you need to add a space there in the text editor. All of these use different text strings for their spaces as well. I'm not sure if that's required or not, but I would recommend doing that as well. If you go to something like this, you can see it has its own unique description, and that will also work properly. And the use screen area is used mostly for things like staffs to show their purpose when you're about to use it. It also can be seen on, maybe not that, but yes, on items that you can use from the use screen. If we click on this, it'll load up the item icons. You can see the list of all the items in the game, including some things that you normally wouldn't think are items. Like I saw some unrelated icons around, some glitched looking versions of those, but from here you can import and export new item icons, and you can change their palettes to work properly, because if you just import a new icon, it's not going to display properly because of how this works. So you'll have to mess with the palette too if you import a brand new icon to use. Well, there's weapon stats as well. You can edit all of these. There's a range button to mess with range of the weapons. There's the price per use area. Since you can sell a weapon when it has one use left, and with the iron blade here, for example, you would get 28 gold for that, they have you set the price of the weapon for one use of it, and then the game multiplies that by the amount of uses to find out how much it should sell it for in the shops. So you won't want to type in like 1500 to the price per use box. That'll make it very overpriced. You want to do some division with the uses there to find out what you want your price per use to be to get a reasonably priced object. There's also the additional effects here. You can set it to cause all of these effects, such as poison, and those should work properly if you assign them to a new weapon, I believe. Then there is the when used slider here, which you can also load up in its own editor, and I believe messing with this is not recommended. I've heard that trying to make new staffs can be a very difficult process, so I'd recommend not messing with those. And there's some other things in here like stat boosters that probably would be easier to make your own of, but you can use the item use effect editor to change what it does here. From a big list of items, chest keys, door keys, so that can be used for some types of items. There's also the edit magic animations area. You can see for something like an iron sword here, it just says it's a map animation that has no custom battle animation. That's really about it. If you look through all of the normal weapons, then you'll see that it's just like that. But with something like a light brand, it'll tell it to use the lightning animation instead of a normal sword attack animation. So you can also edit that to make your own special weapons that do that. Like a hand axe, it has the hand axe battle animation set here. So if you're making your own ranged weapon, you can give it a ranged battle animation from this screen. There's also stat boosts button. If you scroll down to one of the legendary weapons, you can see it's got a stat boost already there. And if we make a new stat boost for this sharp claw, for example, then it will load this up and you can change all of these. Trying to do movement or constitution with the stat boost editor does not function properly, so don't try to do that. There's also the effectiveness editor up here, which if you go to something like the heavy spear, you can see it's set to be effective against knight classes. Nidhogg, effective against monster classes because it's a legendary weapon, and effective against flying classes because it's a bow. we can click on this to edit it. Extended list is where you can add or subtract from this list and change it. And if we wanted to add a new weapon that doesn't already have effectiveness, we could click the new effectiveness button to add that ability, and you can add in effectivenesses. There's also weapon XP per hit. Different types of weapons bring you closer to getting a weapon rank level up, such as the Devil Axe. Gives you 8 weapon experience per hit, so you can make weapons like that that give extra, or you can just have normal weapons that give 1. There's also abilities here, which you can hover over these as well to see what they do. A lot of them are self-explanatory from the title, just unsellable. It prevents them from being sold. You can look at these and see if any of them are useful if you're adding in your own weapon. And if you're adding in a new promotion item, then there is an editor for that, where you can change which promotion items affect which classes. That can also be useful for other circumstances if you want to repurpose these to be used for new classes or change the way they work. That's where you'll want to do that. So that's how you can add your own new items. Next, we're going to look at the way this game handles music. I can't show you how to make your own music, but I can show you some of how to set up music to play. We can go to the song track editor, and I can show you that there's a program here named Sappy. I have not tested out this program, but what it implies from this is that you can play music from the game inside of Fire Emblem Builder, which can be useful, where otherwise you'd have to tell the music to play in some kind of command and then load up the emulator to test it yourself. If you install Sappy, you can test these musics yourself, because I'm sure you haven't memorized what every song in this game is, which when you're trying to get an event set up to use a certain song, it's difficult to find one that fits sometimes, and being able to listen to them in the editor here would be useful. So you could download that and see how well that works. You can also, if you're going to add in new music from, if you've made your own somehow, or if you're going to add in new music from Blazing Blade or Binding Blade, you can scroll through here and look for the ones that say empty track, and then you can set those to your new music, as long as you're not replacing something else that's important, such as sounds for attack animations. You probably don't want to replace those unless you're not intending to use those weapons. Then you can also import with this menu here. With this, you can open up another ROM file, such as another game another GBA game from the series, and then you can just import the selected songs across, which can be helpful. You should note that if you're going to use Blazing Blade or Binding Blade here, it doesn't show the song names. Where it does here, it doesn't show the song names for those games. So you'll have to go into them in Fire Emblem Builder to check what each sound slot is, and write that down somewhere so you can find the right ones. That's the faster way than just exporting it and importing it. There's also the sound room, where you can see these are all the songs that you're able to play in the in-game sound room, which is why it doesn't have all the sound effects like the other song table does. So you can configure which songs show up there if you decide to leave the sound room enabled. There's also the song table, which this is another full list of all the music and all the sound effects in the game. And you'll notice there's also a priority button here. To make it all work properly, you'll want to set map themes to a high priority map music. And you'll have other ones like the attack theme is also very high priority. It's other musics in the game are less important than these themes here. And when you have sound effects, a lot of them are set to low, mid-low, lowest, which is for making them marked as less important than the other sounds. So you'll want to set those properly to work with how the game handles sound. And from, like I showed before, you can change which music and that plays from the chapter editor menu. Now I'm going to show you how to install patches onto your game. You can see there's a patch menu right here where you can scroll through a big list of them, and also if you use the search bar here, then it'll show up, if I type in like promotion, it'll show up a list of promotion related ones. You can also use the search bar up here for that. What a patch is some kind of edit made not by Nintendo but by a random person on the internet that allows you to do different things with these games that aren't normally possible. For example, there's a thing called skill systems. One of the biggest patches, as you can see, because there are many different options for it, but if you can find the newest version of this on the list, I don't believe this is it, but there's many different versions of this from across time. They continue to update it still. This is the most recent version. If we write this, skill systems, then it will allow you to use skills inside your game, just like you have in the newest games in the series, such as Three Houses. So that opens up these menus here, and you can see they've programmed many different skills that you can assign your units. There's personal skills you can assign here. It assigns some by default, but you can change them here if you'd like. And there's also class skills for each class that they gain at certain levels. So that's a very cool patch to work with. There's also a program named Event Assembler that you can download, which in terms of Fire Emblem Builder, it can be used to download to install certain patches that are more complicated than others. A lot of these patches are simple and work with just the base game, but some of them need you to install Event Assembler on your computer so that it can do more advanced changes to the game's code. So if you click on one of these, a lot of them are labeled as EA. If you find a patch that says it requires Event Assembler somewhere, then this one says EA. It uses Event Assembler. So if you want to get into some more complicated patches, you'll need to get that program to help it out. The most important patch here is called Anti-Huffman. What this does is it allows you to edit the text in the game. If you don't turn on this patch, you cannot edit any of the text in the game, which if you're trying to change the game in any way is usually important. So when you first start up this program and try to edit text, it will tell you it will open up a menu to let you install that quickly. It's not even an installation. All of this came with the program, so there is no downloading from the internet necessary. All of these patches already came with the program you downloaded, so it can just, at the click of a button, if you find one that looks interesting, then you can write it, and it will write the program in. Another big one, I say it's big because it has its own editor here, is the Gaiden style spells. So if you've played Fire Emblem Gaiden or Echoes, you know that these spells, you unlock them instead of equipping them, and they use up HP. If you install that, you can use this editor, but it seems to not work very properly. If you try to use this, it causes some issues. So I don't know if that's just for me, but I'd recommend being careful before using that or any of these patches. Any of these could work improperly, which is why you want to do testing if you're installing something big, because a lot of these can cause errors that are unexpected. Some other cool ones are HP bars. There's the chapter titles to text, convert chapter titles to text. That allows you to assign your own chapter title names. In the original game, then all of the names of chapters, like Escape, all of that is a graphic that's already made, but if you install this, it converts it into a font text. So if you type in a new name, then it will display that name instead. Whereas if you don't get that patch, you'd have to make your own graphic from scratch, which is probably too complicated to do. There's also a difficulty select skip, so you can tell the game to automatically set it to one of the 3 difficulties. So if you don't want to set stats for all 3 difficulties and test it on all 3 difficulties, you can just say use normal or use hard and work with that with your game. And if you type in toggle, there are many other useful toggles, such as turn off the health and safety warning that shows up when you first turn on the game, turn off the intro cutscene, things like that that can be helpful if you want to make the game not feel like Sacred Stones anymore. So right now I'm going to open this up just to show you the skills. I didn't install any other patches right now. But actually, if I do install the toggle difficulty select skip, let's say set it to normal. Let's do that then. If we load up the emulator, then it will not prompt us for a difficulty, it will select it for us. And if we skip here, we can see Seth has a health bar now. I believe that comes automatically with the skill systems, actually. And it has other differences, such as having leadership stars now. It moves the affinity over here for that. And you've also got skills. And you can press the select button to view growth rates. It does a lot of cool things like that. Now the game is pretty much the same from here, because I haven't made any other changes to it, but Seth does have skills, even though these ones aren't really affecting what happens right here. Another cool thing that comes with skill systems is that when you kill a boss, then it automatically plays the critical hit animation. That's pretty cool. So skill systems is cool, and you can install on other patches too if you're having any kind of trouble, if there's something that you want to do but you can't do. Look through the patches and see what there is. I'd recommend at some point going through looking at every single patch to see if any of them look like they could be interesting, and record somewhere which ones you might want to test out sometime. These are a really cool thing to expand how much you can do with this program. Now the first thing I'm going to do to show you how to make your own chapter is to show you how to edit the game's text. So if you come into the text editor here, you can scroll through every single piece of normal text in the game. Because I've installed skill systems here, then it has all of those put into, and it extended the amount of strings. If you haven't installed skill systems, when you scroll onto the bottom, it will just be the last support conversation. It'll be right here, and there'll be nothing else after that, but you can use the extended list button to add in more. It's got a lot already, but you can add in more if you want to use some blank ones instead of having to empty out old ones. I'm going to show you how to use this. Now for an example, I'm going to use this conversation here. You can see that when the text first starts here, this conversation, then it has to display both characters' portraits. And you'll see things like toggle smile and a command there in between brackets. That's one way to make the character's smile animation turn on. You'll also see there's parentheses with 5 dots here. That makes a pause. It waits a little bit before showing the next line of text. And these brackets with 1 period there, you'll see those a lot at the end of lines, and those add about 3 frames of extra pause compared to normal. If you want to stick with the rest of the game and what it does, and you could continue adding those, but they aren't necessary. They don't add anything besides that 3-frame pause. If you see those, you can choose to add them if you'd like. There's also an A command there at the end of every other line. It's not on every line there, it's on every other line. And that's telling the game that you need to press the A button to continue. It can only display 2 lines of text at once, so you put the A command every other line to allow it to display text. You can put it on every line, but it would look strange having only 1 line show up on a text box built for 2, and you cannot stick it every 3rd line. That causes issues with the game. It can't display that much text at once. So when you're trying to figure out how much text to put on each line, when you're trying to figure out like when to go over to the next line, I've seen like 30 characters is about the limit. When you first start out, you just have to kind of guess and hope that it works correctly. Test out your text and make sure it does display correctly. If you end up breaking it too late, you can just go back into the text editor here and change it to not flow over the edge of the text box. That's what happens if you let the text run too long, then it flows over the other side and looks messy and can cause some errors. One way you can, if you don't want to extend the list of text and just want to erase something already here, you can go into the source text menu for an easy way to just erase it all. Now we have an empty area to work with. So, with modified text that is not written, unsaved changes will be lost. That's a new thing they've added, so that if you didn't save, you can stop yourself from going before saving. Remember to write around when you make changes. So I'm going to show you here. If we go to the simple menu, double click. New edition doesn't work because this is the first edition here. So there's different options here you can look at. There's a text option if you just want to name like Iron Sword. You can have that in there as an Iron Sword now. You can use that for a weapon name. But you've also got other things you can do. So if you want to have a conversation between characters, you'll come to the character section, choose a place on the screen for them to appear, such as the left middle, and we can choose a character to show up. So now it's going to display art at the beginning of the conversation, and double clicking in the blank space will just bring up that first one. So if you want to add a new one, you got to click the new edition, or another way is to do Control-C, Control-V for just a fast way to add in more. I can come here and I can make Luke show up on the other side. So now we'll be having a conversation. And we can go to the Serif tab and choose one of them to say words. Want to put in a command there, it'll turn blue to show that you typed it correctly. If you don't put an A command in there, it will advance the text automatically, not giving you a chance to stop and read it, so you'll want to make sure you include those at the end of lines. Then there's also character erase, if you want to make a character disappear. There's also move character to move them to a new place on the screen. And there's the jump button, which makes them move a couple pixels down and then move a couple pixels back up, which is, if you test that out, you'll recognize it. It's used pretty commonly within these games to demonstrate like excitement or something along those lines. So that's what you can do with conversations. If you look around into other conversations, you can see other things such as the toggle mouth move, which is what it puts two of those around things like ellipsis, I believe that's called, and like dashes. It puts those around them to make their mouth animation stop happening, because it wouldn't be happening when they're making a pause like that in real life. So once you get into doing advanced commands, you can do things like that to make it look more realistic in the way the normal game does it. So now we're going to go through the event condition editor, which you can access from right here. So with this, you can select the map from the side of the screen here that you want to work with. The first section from this list is the turn conditions. You can choose a turn number and which type of turn you want it to run on, and you can have an event run. I'll explain events in a minute. You can have things happen such as reinforcements spawning, events of all sorts. You can look at examples of what other chapters use this editor for, and you can use yours in the same way. You can also use this feature. You can have something that has 1 through 255, so as its turn range, and have a flag here, so when this flag is changed, then it runs this event, which is how you can make reinforcements spawn on depending on like your location or some other factor. Next is talk condition. There aren't any for the first chapter, you can see, but if you click the extended list button, it allows you to make more, whatever number of additional ones you want. So now you've got one there to work with. And you set talk condition. You can make a new event here that has a conversation occur and characters changing from an enemy to a player, for example. And you choose which unit initiates the talking and which unit is talked to, which is why you'll see if you come here, it happens both ways and they use the same flag for both, so that you can use either one to initiate the conversation through this method. Then there's the map objects. You can see by looking through the different chapters, there's the little houses as well as like the full villages. There's also village center, which is where brigands target to destroy villages. So you want to set that up if you want that to be possible. We've also got armories, got chests, thrones to seize, doors to open, vendors. There's a lot of features that revolve around this map object editor. So you can set the coordinates of where it happens, and you can choose from a bunch of different types. And you can set a flag to be set when you go to that location. So for example, with Throne here, it has a siege flag attached to it, which ends the chapter when you do the seizing there, and you give it this event number 1, which does nothing, and it just tells it to do that flag, which is a way to end the chapter through that method. If you want to do something like a village, then you'll need to go in and set tile changes from this editor. You can see that like on this chapter it has a bunch of different tile changes, which are things like making the villages appear destroyed, making this log bridge come out, also making the villages close themselves once you've talked in them. And it does the same with like doors and chests. You can see how those work like that. So if you come to that's just one way to view the tile changes, but if you go to the map editor, then you can see that you can choose from a list of tile changes. Tile changes. There we go. You can see the list of them, and you can resize what range it's in and change the coordinates on the map of it. And you can set it to be different types of terrain for the changes. So that's how you do that. I'm also going to go over flags here. Flags are used to indicate when a certain event has occurred. So if you come into the advanced editor and search for flag, you'll see an event flag namer here. There's a battle quotes flag, which it uses to remember if you've fought the boss before and activated their quotes yet. There's like a defeat boss flag, seize flag for ending chapters. There's this flag says if you've defeated all the enemies. And there's also a bunch of temporary flags here, which are used for events such as chests being opened and villages being entered, things that you want to happen once and only once. So you can use a flag to help the game remember if that's happened yet or not. And it'll know whether to let it happen again. There's also the usage flag editor, which is very helpful because you can go to any of the chapters on the list and see exactly where each flag is used, which is helpful if you want to check if a flag is being set or unset and you don't know where or why. You can see here if it's already been used somewhere else. So that's a helpful feature, being able to use flags to help with your events. So you can also go through the rest of this list and see there's things like range conditions, which, for example, in Chapter 1 you can see it has a range set here. If you enter this range, it spawns reinforcements in this bottom corner, if you remember. So you can use this range condition area for stuff like that. It also houses some other conditional events, such as the game over event. That's where you can find this, and you can change some other things involving ending the chapter. There's a lot of do not use ones here. You probably don't want to mess with the tutorial settings either, because those are not very well understood. It's not really known how to use those effectively. But if you come to the traps area, you can see this is where ballistas are, fire traps, the vertical arrows from Fire Emblem 6, and it also sets the Gorgon eggs from this editor if you want to use those. It's also the Trap 2 setting, but it only uses these for this one chapter and nowhere else, so I'm not sure. Probably want to use the Trap 1 setting. Next, we can go to the unit placer, which is used for setting units onto the map. So you can search for that in here, or you can find it right up there, the unit placer. So when you come in here, you can select any of the chapters in the game again, and you can see all of the units that spawn during them. You can also see from the special events, such as this from the beginning of the prologue. So you're able to see and change a lot of settings in regards to that. You can see all the different chapters have their own placements. If you come to chapter 6 here, you can see there's world map skirmishes placements. If you're going to use the world map for whatever you're doing, then you've got that here. You'll notice that there's a bunch of sets here for the player placement of that. That's because whenever you're placing the characters to be changed from the preparation screen, it doesn't matter which unit slot you use. You can even send into all the same ones, because all the player placement setting here does is tell the game which slots are available for use when you're switching around characters in the preparation screen. So that's why it doesn't matter what they are here, but when you're doing other events, you'll want to specify which characters specifically should show up in them. And another useful feature is the force deployment menu here, where you can tell the game which units you want to always be deployed for certain chapters. You can change that if you need to from there. So let's come look at this here and see all the different settings around here. You can change the unit that's going to show up, you can change which class they are, and this is where you set the class they'll spawn into the game as. You have these settings here that aren't really useful for anything. You can change their starting level. You can change which army they're a part of. Don't use the defeat army. Stick with these top 3. You can change the auto level from here. If you set it to do not grow, then they will spawn with the stats you set them with. If you click class dependent, it will level them up to whatever level you set based on their class growth rates, so you can use that for some enemy units if you'd like. Then there's the AI. You can tell it. There's a lot of different settings with this, but you'll really only use a couple of them. There's a secondary AI as well. If you set it to move towards the enemy, it moves towards the enemy, and if you set it to do not move, it stays put. Those are the two most important ones here. And you can have chance of action 100%. That means if there's someone in range, they will always attack that unit. And attack only when adjacent means they'll only attack when there's a unit adjacent. So, for example, if you set them to a chance factor 100% and do not move, then they will not move, but they will attack you if you enter their range. And if you set it to this, then they will not move, and they will only attack you when you are right up next to them. So that's how you can change that. And then you can also have this to just make them move towards you. Then you can have them go into recovery mode and like retreat to go try to heal up when they get to a certain percent if you'd like. You can mess around with what they prioritize when it comes to attacking, or you could just leave it as the default, and you can tell them whether they're able to retreat or not. You can choose the items they spawn with. You can still only set the first 4 for whatever reason. You can't set a 5th item for them to hold, even though they have 5 item slots. And you can change the coordinates they have. If we come to like this, for example, you can see he first spawns in at these coordinates, and there's a second set below them that he will move to when he is spawned in. So you can do that. So just as an example, I'm going to click the allocate new space button here and add in 2 new units. Let's say like, you can add in Glenn, for example. It already defaults to having him as a Wyvern Lord up there. He doesn't know that's what he's supposed to be, but I could also set him to a Knight, for example. Level 3 Knight with an Iron Lance. And we can tell him to spawn in right there. We could also come here and add in Cormag. We could tell him to be a monk. Level 19 monk. NPC with whatever 88 is, Master Seal. We'll play them in the middle of the mountains, because why not? They've got these. They're labeled as new right here, but once we add them into an event, it'll give them a proper label. But I'll come back to them later, because I can't do anything with them right now. So I'm kind of going to go through a bunch of different settings quickly when it comes to the event editor, because there's a lot to work with here. But this is a very important thing that allows you to make the events that actually have the game work. So if we come here to the simple menu, you can see the sidebar here, which lists a bunch of important things. It's got the talk command I set up and didn't add any parameters to. It's got the turn conditions, and it's got the start and end event. So you can click the start event here and see the entire thing. What I'm going to do is probably not erase that. That could be a bad idea. It can cause some glitches if I don't make anything show up. But instead I could come down here to the bottom. If I click Control-C, Control-V, it just easily adds in another one right there. You can do the same with Insert to add in a new line. I'm going to use this here as my demonstration. You can click the template button here to see a bunch of different templates. You can add a check to see if a unit's alive. You can check if it's hard mode. There's a lot of complex looking things here that you can easily add in from this menu. I can add in like a talk conversation that gives you an item. So all kind of things you can add to the template there. You can also click commands to see a whole big list of commands. You can scroll through them all here if you really want, but it's going to be difficult to find anything. There's a search bar, so you can search for things like the preparation screen. You'll want to call that with a command from the event menu. We can just look through all of these different options. There's the event template section again in a different format here. There's the text button. These top 2 ones are the important ones. You can make a conversation happen with a background or with no background. If we were to click on this, you can choose from a list of backgrounds with that, and you can type in different text strings to have them show up in your event. You can come to the camera and tell it to move instantaneously to a character. We can tell it to move to an X and Y coordinate. There's a lot of trial and error involved with the camera, because if you type in a pair of coordinates, it will go to that general location, but not always the exact place you want. So you might have to mess around with the coordinates of the camera movement, keep trying it until you get the place you want. There's also the background editor. You can set backgrounds and erase them from here if you want them to be unrelated to some text, if you want it to be used for some other purpose. There's the frame editor. If you ever notice that little yellow square that can appear on spaces during events to highlight something, you can set that from here. You can make it appear just on a pair of coordinates, or you can make it appear on a specific character if you'd like. There's the music here. You can tell it to play a song from the list and choose that and use it from the music editor. There's also items. You can give the player gold. You can give them an item to a character. You can give it to the active visiting unit, which is if you have a character enter a village and use this command, the game will recognize that and it will give the item to that character. You can also set desert treasure from here, but there's some other stuff involved in that, as you can see at the bottom of this selection down in this section. It gives you some additional instructions on how to make that work. Then there's unit placer section. You use this to load in player units, NPC units, enemy units. That's all from this menu. It's also like the load units from memory. You can use this for characters that are already recruited, and if you use some of the ones up here, it will add it to your party or make it disappear at the end of events. You can do a lot of things with that up there, with the different options in that menu. Then there's unit movements. You can tell a specific character slots to do things and do different kinds of movements, even movements to multiple different coordinates in a row. Or you can select a specific XY coordinate if it's one of the generic soldiers, who you might have multiple units from the same character slot on the field at once, and trying to tell that character slot to move is not going to work, so you'll want to use coordinates in that case to specify the correct one. There's also unit erase, which can kill a unit, make them disappear. You can also use the clear all ones here. This, if you use like clear all player units, it doesn't kill them, it just removes them from the battlefield, so you can do other things with that screen. There's unit affiliation too. You can change the group of them. You can make a unit into a player, or an NPC unit into a player. You can make stuff like that. There's also the force promotion from this menu if you'd like to force a unit to promote. And unit other, which can do things like change the AI of an enemy unit. You can check if they have certain skills. If you have the skills installed, and you can change their HP, which is what they use right here for Seth. Since it loads in a different Seth after he fights with Volter, then it actually sets the HP from there. He's a different one than the one, I don't know. There's the weather. You can change the fog distance. You can change it to rain or snow from this menu. There's tile changes. To execute a tile change, which is like opening a chest or a door, if you stick in their ID or the coordinates of the tile change, you can tell it to activate from this menu, whereas normally it would just activate automatically if you set it up properly. There's map production, which has all sorts of things like the stall button up here. You can make the game hold on a second before doing the next thing. You can have the screen fade to and from black and white. You can use a destroying a sacred stone effect for certain things if you'd like. You can make this screen shake in an earthquake. Here's the map other section. You can see like the call preparation screen. You can use this up here to make it display a different map temporarily, like it uses at the start of the prologue. right? Then you've got the event battle menu, which is like the Seth versus Walter fight in the beginning of the prologue. What you do is you set the event battle from here, and there's a bunch of different settings you can choose from. This one, for example, you have two sides here. From here you change what this looks like is the attacker will attack, then the defender, then the attacker gets to attack a second time. You can set how much damage they do. If you leave it at 0, then it does the amount those two characters would actually do to each other, but if you set an amount, you can change what it's going to do, and you can also set it to hit, critical, or miss, so you can use the correct animations for that. But you don't set the characters from there, you set the characters from the execute button, which comes, you'll put in a set, and then you'll put in an execute right after that, which is where you set the attacker and defender, and you can even change their weapons if you'd like. And there's subroutine if you want to call an event within an event. There's conditions. You probably want to use a template for any of these things because it can be complicated to figure out how to make these work normally. Got the unit condition, same thing for that. You'll want to use an event template. One other thing you can do is if there's something you want to check and you know that the game checks it at some point, you could go to that map, go to that event, and you can see what they did and copy over the way that they did it. Like, for example, if I wanted to check if a unit died, then I could come to the end event of this and know that it checks here if a character is alive. So you can copy some of this stuff over to your event and try to make it work for you. Right, then there's another complicated feature you'll want to use a template for. You can turn flags on and off here with this. There's also the world map ones if you're going to try to use the world map. And there's the ending, which can display total number of turns, return to the title screen, roll endgame credits, just things for using after you finish the playthrough of the game. So, one thing I'm going to demonstrate now is making units appear. You can see here it uses this kind of address. You can find that in the unit placer. If I come to my new units I made here, you select the top unit from the list, come to this menu, and you copy that address. Then if you come back to the event editor menu, I can come down here to the very bottom and tell it to load units and move new units. So then these guys will appear. If I come to the unit placer, it's still going to call them new, but if I close that out and reload it, then it'll be properly here. One other thing I'm going to change is I can make him start down here and walk all the way up there if I'd like. That's something you can change. You can also have them just start there in the middle. Just if I load up the emulator, then I can see that it actually does. If I skip through some of these events here, then it does load them in and move them properly. He's going to have weird stats because I haven't gone into make the stats work, but if I move these guys back, then I can have him give damage here, if I'd like. Notice I was able to change that value there and add him a new starting position, and it did not change the address. But if I were to come in here and add a third unit, which whenever you add new units from the extended list, it duplicates the top slot. to make all those new ones, which can be useful. If you're setting up a bunch of enemies to use on the battlefield, you can just set up the first one and then extend the list, and you've got a full thing of them. But if I come back to Event Editor, that also works properly. But sometimes you'll notice that it changes the address and you might have to re-input it. That can happen. So that should be about all you need to know about making your own events. You just put them in an order and it'll run all the things you put in here in that order. So you can, if you're still confused on how things would work with that, you can look through examples here and see exactly what it does. There's a lot of things that you might not end up adding into yours if you're not sure what they do, but you can learn a lot of useful things from looking through events in the game, such as if you type in this to the music editor, then it mutes all the music. You can learn a lot of things from just looking through events and practicing. There's some other things I want to go over now. You'll see that events have an event end command here at the bottom. You can delete that if you'd like, because it always adds itself back, so you don't need to remember to do anything with that. There's also another thing you'll notice is, I forgot to mention that you can click the display low instruction checkbox here to add in some new options. If you use an event thing here marked as low, then it will start doing that event, but it will start doing the next one after that as well. So that can be situationally useful if you'd like to have multiple things occurring at the same time, such as multiple characters moving at once. But normally this is checked off by default, I believe, because you aren't meant to use those for everything. You don't want to use them like that. Right, I'm also going to show off a couple of miscellaneous things here that you can use when you're creating maps for the game, such as the battle quotes editor. You set two instances of it, one where the boss is attacking you and one where you're attacking the boss. You set the map, you set which completion flag it has, which is the battle quotes flag for a lot of this, which just means once you've seen this conversation once, it won't let you see it a second time. You can set the text there, right? And you can also see there's some other things at the bottom, such as triangle attacks. Alright, so all of that can be seen from the battle quotes editor. There's also the boss BGM editor, where you can change which music plays during each boss fight. It doesn't even have to be a unit set as a boss. You can set it to any kind of unit and it will play that song whenever you're fighting them. I'm also going to point out the thief escape point. If you want to use that, you can tell the thieves where they need to flee to once all the chests have been open on the map. There's also one last thing, is the AI's item usage. You can tell the AI whether they're allowed to use certain types of things. That can be useful in some situations if you don't want them to use certain items. If you don't want an enemy to use a door key that you want the player to be given and used. Well, I hope I've gone over everything you might have wanted to know about this program. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I might be able to help you with any problems you might be having. This was my guide to Fire Emblem Builder GBA for beginners to figure out how all of this stuff works.